Get ready to head back to the farm with better looks than ever. Hey there, it's Theo from Geeky Gamer Guy. This video will be showing how to play La Granja Deluxe Master Set from Board & Dice. Note, even though this shows the prototype components for the Deluxe Master Set, most of the rules are essentially the same as the original game, with the first part of the game covering the rules for a multiplayer game, and then the solo and some modules. There's a lot and more is on the way. Be sure to use the handy links in the description to help you out. Now let's get to work. This place isn't gonna run itself. La Granja is a competitive game for 1 to 4 players. Players are owners of small provincial farms aiming to grow them over 90 to 120 minutes into the mighty country estate La Granja. The most prosperous player wins. To set up, place the game board in the center of the table, using the side for 1 to 2 players or 3 to 4 players respectively. In 3-player games, cover the outer market spaces that show 4 players on them. Each player gets a player board, 25 player markers of 1 color, 1 set of 4 donkey tiles, 1 victory point, and 1 silver. Each player places 1 player marker on the trade commodity space. Shuffle and deal 4 cards to all players. Leave the remaining farm cards as a draw pile near the board. Sort and shuffle all roof tiles by their backs. Place them in face-down stacks according to their back, and add a number of roof tiles equal to the number of players playing to these spaces. Return unused roof tiles to the box. Flip the round 1 roof tiles face up and place them in a row above the stacks. Place enough craft markers per player next to the respective buildings. Plus add a victory point to each of the player ownership areas. Now 1 player rolls a die to determine which of the 3 craft buildings will be unavailable during the start of the game. Roll a die until 3 different numbers matching the 6 craft buildings come up, placing building order marker number 1 on the first number rolled, then 2, and lastly order marker 3. Also place a victory point next to each of them. Randomly determine the first player and then give them the turn order marker number 1. Going clockwise, give the remaining players a turn order marker. Any other turn order markers not used are returned to the box. Set aside a number of dice based on the number of players playing according to this chart. In turn order, each player places a marker on the central market, with the first player placing on the lowest number and then the other players following in ascending order. Spaces 2, 3, 4, 5 in a 4-player game, 2, 3, 4 in 3-player games, and 2 and 3 in a 2-player game. Put siesta markers in reverse turn order with the last player on bottom and the first player on top. Lastly, make a supply of victory points, silver, and exhaustion markers. Now we're ready to get started. A game of La Granja plays over 6 rounds, with each player taking a turn according to the turn marker they have. Each round has 4 phases: farm phase, revenue phase, transportation phase, and scoring phase. Before I go over the phases though, I wanted to talk about a couple things that'll help out tremendously. Like, a lot. First is player markers. Player markers signify a resource or commodity depending on where it is placed on the player's farm or on the main board. So if a player marker is on an olive field, that marker is an olive. Alternatively, a marker on the trade commodity space, like in setup, is, you guessed it, a trade commodity. Next, just like player markers, the farm cards are multi-use and serve a different function depending on which side of the farm board they're slotted into. Lastly, the most important one is anytime actions. The game has 4 anytime actions that can be taken at any time on the active player's turn. These 4 actions are using trade commodities, buying and selling of resources, upgrading resources, and harvest goods on fields. When using a trade commodity, return a trade commodity to the supply to take one of the 5 actions depicted on the farm board. Taking 4 silver from the supply, taking 2 of the 3 harvest goods, olives, grapes, and grain, placing a marker on the corresponding dens on the farm board, draw or play 1 card, either drawing from the top of the deck to their hand or playing a card to their farm. More on this in a bit. Take a pig, placing a marker on a pig stall on the player's farm, or upgrading 2 goods for free, moving the chosen good along the arrows on the farm board. Another anytime action is a player can buy or sell a resource using silver according to the red and green text on each den. Red is to buy and green is to sell. So for example, to purchase an olive, it would cost 3 silver, and the player places a marker in that den. or they can sell an olive for 1 silver and removes a marker back to their supply. A player can also spend silver to upgrade a resource to their upgraded good. For example, grapes from a field can be upgraded to wine for 3 silver each. Moving the marker to show it's that upgraded good. Note that upgraded goods can't be directly bought or sold. The player can indirectly buy an upgraded good by buying the harvest good and then also upgrading it. Lastly, a player can harvest goods on fields. Normally, the goods stay on the fields until they are either upgraded, used as payment for a farm extension, or delivered. All of this will be explained later, I promise. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's continue. The farm phase has 4 steps. Play a farm card and draw new cards, take income, growth on fields and pig offspring, and purchase roof tiles. During playing a farm card in the first round, all players play 2 cards, but only a single card is played in later rounds. When playing a farm card, it can be placed to the 4 sides of the farm board. The left side makes it a field for which the depicted harvest good will grow later in the farm phase. The top makes the card into market barrows, which has specific goods to be delivered on them. The bottom shows space for 3 helpers that give the player special abilities. Some give a benefit that can only be performed once per round, adding an exhaustion token to the card when used. If there's already 3 barrows or helpers on the player board, one can be discarded to make room for another card. Lastly, the right side shows a way to add farm extensions, which can increase hand size, room for more pigs, or extra silver during the income phase. Playing a card as a field, market barrel, or helper is free, but farm extensions cost different goods to play there. So the first extension is 1 good, then the second would be 2 different goods, removing the markers back to the supply. Players can look at the chart on their farm board when in doubt. After that, draw up to hand size limit. At the start of the game, it's 3 cards for all players, but extensions could increase it. If a player is over the card limit, they must discard down to their hand size at this point. Note that if a player has more cards than their limit at any other point during the round, the player doesn't discard down to their limit. Next, take income for each of the icons depicted, which could be silver or other resources. Next, grow every empty field by placing a marker on them, and if the player has at least 2 pigs, they make a pig. There must be space for it though. Then players can purchase 1 roof tile in turn order. Unless it's the first round, then they're purchased in reverse order. Each roof tile has a printed cost that corresponds to the current round. So the first round roof tile would cost 1, and the second round would cost 2. Purchased roof tiles are placed in the leftmost empty space on the farm board. When a player covers a space with victory points, they immediately gain them. Each roof tile has a one-time benefit that can be used on a player's turn, and then flip face down. The player only has room for a total of 5 roof tiles. Next is the revenue phase. The starting player takes the revenue dice and rolls them. Place each die next to its matching number on the board. Then in turn order, each player takes the die and places it in the leftmost space on their farm board, and then performs the depicted action. Take 1 pig. Add a marker to an empty stall. If the player doesn't have room for the pig, it's sold immediately for 5 silver. Player draw a card or take a harvest good. Take 2 different harvest goods. Take 4 silver. Upgrade 2 resources free of charge, or upgrade 1 resource and move 1 step on the siesta track, or advance 2 steps on the siesta track. Lastly, carry out 1 delivery or 2 silver. I'll discuss deliveries in a sec, but they are done the same as in the transportation phase. After all players have taken a die, in turn order they take a second die. After that, 1 die will remain and all players get the action of it. Next in the transportation phase, players will use donkeys to deliver goods to various spots on the main and farm boards, and potentially move up the siesta track. Choose a donkey tile. Each player simultaneously chooses an available donkey tile. I say available because in rounds 2 and 3, players won't be able to use previously chosen donkey tiles that are on their farm board. Players do get back all donkey tiles to potentially use again at the start of the transportation phase in the 4th round though. Place the chosen donkey tile face down on the space for it. Once everyone is selected, all players reveal their tiles. Advance on the siesta track. In turn order, players move up the siesta track according to the number of symbols depicted on it. Then a new turn order is made. The player furthest up the siesta track gains the number 1 turn order marker. Then the next highest player gains the number 2, and so forth. If 2 or more players share the same space, the marker on top takes the lower number. It's important to note that during this step is the only time player order will shift. So if a player wants to deliver first, they may want to choose a donkey tile that'll move them up further up the siesta track. Now in the new turn order, players deliver goods. Each depicted donkey on the chosen tile gives 1 free delivery. Each player carries out all their deliveries up to the chosen donkey tile before the next player. A delivery is moving 1 good to either craft buildings on the main board or market barrels with the matching resource. When delivering to a craft building, move a good from the player board to the available building. Each player has their own row of goods showing what needs to be delivered to it. Once a player fully delivers to a craft building, move a marker to show the player has fully supplied that building, and if they're the first to fully supply it, gain 1 victory point. They no longer can supply that craft building. Then they receive victory points matching the current round, as well as the matching craft marker, slotting it on their farm board. Each marker gives an immediate bonus as well as an ongoing benefit showing in what phase the player gains it. Merchant House immediately gives 3 silver and provides the player 3 silver during step 3 in the farm phase. Wainwright immediately gives the player a free delivery as well as victory points of where the player's siesta marker currently is, as well as an additional step when advancing on the siesta track and a free delivery in every transportation phase moving forward. Deli gives 1 trade commodity immediately and provides a trade commodity during step 3 in the farm phase. Greengrocer gives the player an immediate resource and then any 1 resource during step 3 in the farm phase. Village Store gives the player 2 victory points immediately and then an additional 2 victory points whenever they take a craft marker in future rounds. Not the current round though. Butcher gives victory points equal to the number of market barrels the player has on their farm board immediately, and then provides a bonus victory point for when a market barrel is delivered. More on market barrels in a sec. At the beginning of the game, 3 of the craft buildings were blocked off at setup. When a player is the first to fully supply an unlocked craft building, the craft building with the building order marker 1 is unlocked. Then the order marker 2 after a craft building is fully supplied, and then finally 3, removing it back to the box. The new craft building is available to be supplied by all players, even in the same round. The player who unlocks the new craft building receives 1 victory point. A player can also use the deliveries to supply market barrel cards on their farm board. Just like the craft buildings, they show what resources each barrel needs. Move a resource from the farm board onto a barrel per delivery used. Once a market barrel is fully supplied, they take a number of victory points shown on the card between 2 and 6. Gain 1 trade commodity, take all markers back into the supply. Then the player moves 1 of their markers to an empty space with the value shown on the card to the central market on the main board. All opponent markers on adjacent market spaces with values lower than that of the player are removed and returned to their supplies, giving the player 1 victory point for each marker bumped this way. Then discard the market barrel. When all market spaces corresponding to the victory point value of a completed market barrel are already occupied, the player may choose another player's marker on a space of the value printed on the card, and then remove it from the board, replacing it with their marker. Purchase deliveries. After that, players can choose to pay silver to make extra deliveries up to the number shown on their farm extension. Players start with 1 printed. After that, play moves on to the scoring phase. Remove all exhaustion markers off used helpers that have them, and perform cleanup and scoring. Each player takes victory points for every marker left in the central market. If it's the 6th round, play goes to endgame scoring. Otherwise, each player gets 1, 2, or 3 victory points for the position on the siesta track. Return siesta markers to the beginning of the track, stacking the first player on top with other players in order below it. Turn over the next round's roof tiles. At the end of the 6th round, the game is over, and all players perform these steps. Sell player markers left on farm boards for normal prices if they're resources, or conversion prices if they're trade commodities, and convert them all into silver. Exchange 5 silver into 1 victory point. The player with the most victory points wins. If there's a tie, the player with the most silver remaining among the tied players is the winner. If there's still a tie, they share in the victory. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, La Granja can be played solo, and it's very useful to learn the game's key mechanics. All rules from the multiplayer game still apply with a few exceptions. Note! This is the original rules for solo play. A full Atama-based solo mode will be available in the module rulebook when available. To set up, gather all components for 1 player and the player markers of a second color to be used for the neutral player. Take 5 dice as in a 2-player game. Use player order markers 2 and 3. Shuffle them and draw 1 and place the player's marker on that number in the market. The neutral player marker is put on the other hex. Place 2 roof tiles. The farm phase plays out just like the multiplayer game. Then during the revenue phase after the dice are rolled, if the player is a start player with the player order marker number 2, they choose 1 die. Afterwards, one die is discarded. If it's the first, second, or third round, the lowest numbered die is discarded. If it's a fourth, fifth, or sixth round, the die with the highest number is discarded. If the player is not the start player, one die is discarded before the player selects the die, then another before the player selects a second die, using all the rules as said before. Then take the remaining die's action. In the transportation phase, if the player is the start player, they carry out their complete transportation phase as normal. Afterwards, one card is drawn from the deck. Now the neutral player places a marker on a space of the market corresponding to the victory point value of the drawn card. These rules are in effect. The neutral player will remove as many markers of the player as they can. If there are several spaces to choose from, they place their marker to make it as difficult as possible to remove them, meaning placing the marker as far away from other markers or spaces adjacent to high number hexes. If the player is not the start player, a card is drawn from the draw deck and the neutral player places one of their markers before the player does their transportation phase. In the scoring phase, if the player reaches at least the third space on the siesta track, they are the first player in the next game round. Otherwise, they play second. The rest of the game is played as normal. While I won't be going over them all, the Deluxe Master Set will have many modules created by many prominent game designers, including the original ones, to switch up and tailor the game experience of the Granja. Most will be for experienced players, but there are others that'll make some aspects a bit easier. Counselors. This module created by none other than Stefan Feld allows players extra function to revenue dice, paired with a new sideboard that offers each player their own set of bonuses that can be taken whenever a special revenue die is drafted. Betwixt. This module adds a layer of direct player interaction as well as an extra location where goods can be delivered. It is best for experienced players who want more options and even more direct competition between players. While it works for 2 players, it is recommended for 3 to 4 player games. Bustling Town. This is one of the biggest modules. It changes the revenue spaces and introduces buildings that can be added to the main board. It gives players direct profits for placing markets adjacent to buildings in the market. This module gives a stronger area control aspect of the game. Grand Markers. This module adds an extra layer of decision to the deliveries. Using the grand markers adds extra utility to craft buildings and allows players to create stronger positions on the market area of the board. Hired Hands. Hired Hands is a module that introduces more flexibility to the game, allowing players to use special workers that can help with deliveries and keep their markers on the market board. It is recommended for players who want to be able to make more deliveries and easier use of craft buildings. Long Distance Trade. This module brings a new option of using goods to receive immediate victory point rewards without having to spend deliveries, and gives a new way to score leftover goods at the end of the game. Players will have to race in order to take the best positions, with some offering trade commodities. That's it! Now you're ready to get playing. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to help out the channel, tap the like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to not miss out on future videos. Until next time, stay geeky. Keep gaming! Flip the round 1 roof. The Granja. Ah. 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 Ah.